So 6 participants, that's the people joining us virtually, right? In addition to who's here. Or I guess if people are logged on though, that's included. Oh, 9. All right. Looks like we have 9 participants now. Okay. Great. All right, we'll call the meeting to order. And welcome everyone. Thank you very much for joining us for this monthly meeting of the Community Equity Task Force. And we will, first of all, welcome our guest, Tom Newkirk, who's our consultant. We'll hear from him in a little bit. Well, first on our agenda is the approval of the minutes for the May 13th, 2021 meeting. So everyone had a chance to review those minutes, and if anyone would make a motion, we can act on that. Well, we have 9 participants out of 13. Is that?
Okay, you did way better, Matt. I'll make a motion to approve as mailed.
Second.
Okay, it's been moved and seconded to approve the minutes of the May 13th, 2021 meeting. Discussion? Okay, all those in favor of the motion, please say aye.
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 All those opposed? All those opposed say no. Okay, the minutes of the May 13th meeting are approved as presented. The next item on the agenda is we'll hear from our consultant, Mr. Newkirk, and I'll let Amal introduce him and proceed from there.
Our consultant, Tom Newkirk, will start the conversation with his perspective on the task on hand and his outlook for how to proceed from here.
Okay, and then I also, if my mic on, I'm good.
Is it on?
On.
That is now, there we go.
Okay, thank you.
Only for I'm assuming for Zoom, they need to be able to hear me. So I introduced myself last time, so I'm going to kind of get right to it. I've spoken since the meetings. I was engaged by Amal in the city. I engaged in a number of conversations, as many in person as I could. I spoke with Chief Kitzmiller at length. I spoke with the mayor and the city manager and Amal at length at times. I spoke with the Human Rights Commission, Ms. Tibbetts and Mr. Brown. I spoke with the Alliance representatives, at least a couple of them, Ms. Stumbo and Ms. Clymer, Anna Clymer. And I spoke to a couple of city Marion residents, including Mr. Rowe and another individual, to kind of get perspective of the various pieces of this puzzle. So my perception was, from speaking to everyone, is that there's some individuals who feel that progress has been made, and others who feel that progress is not being made, or it's starting to kind of spin its wheels, would be how I would describe it. I would suggest to you all that you've made more progress than you think you have. I think that, just bluntly, you're taking on a challenge that is systemic, is largely beyond the power of any particular city to solve on its own. And you've made a lot of progress. I mean, and the question is now is, can you take what you've done, expand on it, focus it, and get to a point of closure sometime between now and the fall, where you can report your progress to the city council, show you've made progress, and then decide if you're, where you move on from there. Just from my perspective, the work you've done it's not been a delay. It's not been a waste of time. You've made quite a bit of progress. And bluntly, it just takes time to get one's mind around all the possible ways to incorporate equity, cultural respect into an organization, into a city like this, given time and budget, et cetera. So that's generally my perspective. Now, to help focus this effort, if you will, I think it's important to step back and realize what a city can do and what it cannot do. First of all, a city can manage its message to the public. You know, what its website says, how it decides to incorporate diversity, equity, and inclusion. All of you can look at the web page. It looks decent to me. You have individuals of diversity on there. You have other persons. You have a good message on there. You can always update and improve the messaging. But generally, your messaging to the public is one thing a city can control. The city can manage its personnel, you know, who it hires. It can increase diversity through recruiting and hiring. And of course, once you hire more individuals of color, more individuals of diverse backgrounds, do you make them feel welcome? That's always been an issue. You may hire individuals in, but if you don't improve your approach to cultural awareness and bias, it can make those individuals feel unwelcome and they can leave. So you got to do both. You got to bring more people in and then make you feel welcome. A city can manage its policies and its procedures. That's, you know, the reducing impact on groups from basic written policies like criminal background checks or hiring requirements, you know, college degrees for being something that's unrelated to that particular position. And then of course, the city can manage its personnel both in terms of how they interact with others, training on bias and cultural awareness. City can manage its ordinances, its laws, and its rules. And that's where the boards and commissions comes in. And the city can manage, of course, public safety. It's a big, big component, you know, law enforcement, firefighting, other parts of public safety. And of course, they can manage not only the hiring in terms of those public safety organizations hiring, increasing diversity, but also how they interact with the public. And that leads to the equitable policing idea. That's pretty much it. That's the city in, you know, kind of this nutshell of what the city can do. It can't do other things. It can't change the world and the universe, but it can focus on those issues. And I think that this task force has addressed each one of these and can keep focusing on those issues and then focus them further and then get to a point of recommendations for some changes and some upgrades to these areas and get closure on that front. So just to back up a second, my understanding is, and I think you talk about this through the other agenda items, is that the city is working to address all of the matters that are under its control. I know that the HR director, Kirsten, ma'am, I forgot your last name.
That's okay, Fisher.
Fisher, Kirsten, Miss Fisher, they're hiring an HR director to create more streamline their policies and procedures and their personnel in terms of hiring, recruiting, and improving and increasing diversity and equity in the personnel department. We're going to be doing a review of policies for looking for impact on certain groups, and that'll be with myself and Ms. Fisher and potentially the city manager, talking about accountability, you know, how we update data collection so that you know that you're making progress on increasing diversity and equity in personnel. And then we'll be dealing with boards and commissions and the rules and how they apply their policies that may affect persons of color or other minority groups, and applying the equity lens work that Mr. Rowe and others in his group have been working on to kind of make more equity in those areas. The Alliance has issued 3 proposals, one for addressing equitable policing, providing for a mental health liaison, and addressing more openness and welcomeness in the city going externally. Again, to note this, that the request of more openness and welcomeness and in the city generally, that's going to be dealt with by the education and the changes to personnel. So in other words, these are overlapping. The city's dealing with personnel, training, cultural awareness of city employees, which will increase welcomeness, which addresses the Alliance's 3rd concern. And the task force has identified you know, the equity lens and the need for methods to communicate all these things you're doing to the public. And then finally, we're dealing with the equitable policing issue in more detail. So effectively, what we wanted to do today was to kind of say, here's where we're focusing. We're trying to narrow this down to things the city can do. We're going to go through the other agenda items and kind of show, maybe resolve a couple of these issues like the mental health liaison, talk briefly about what the city's doing on its policy and procedure review. And then the July meeting, we talk more about the policy and procedure review with the city with Ms. Fisher and myself. And then if you can kind of corral these and limit some of these issues, you can move on to the equitable policing issue, which is of course always the largest elephant in the room. It's something that you guys need to be able to focus on, talk to Mr. Chief Kitzmiller about what he's done, and be able to deal with those issues in a very, very specific meeting. And then at that point, you'd be able to gather all these issues you've done and maybe make a presentation to the city council about what you've done more efficiently and effectively. sometime this fall. So that's just my analysis of kind of how to corral these very complicated issues, show kind of some things, get you to the point where you can see what you've done, and then move forward on these key issues of policy review for the city, get to equitable policing, et cetera. So that's my perspective. Hopefully, you know, and I also wanted to mention one thing in particular to Ms. Tibbetts' concern she had raised. There's nothing that I do, nothing that I would propose for training anyone, cultural awareness. I focus sometimes on black and white because it's the biggest conflict at times. We don't ignore gender. Any training that happens, any cultural awareness that happens will be all encompassing, dealing with gender, LGBTQ, and other groups of minority status, not merely black and white. Everyone will be included. And so I just want to make certain that we acknowledge that. And I know that that's what everyone else is agreeing with as well. Excuse me. So effectively, I think that we need to move on to the next agenda items, and then you can move on to the purpose of getting closure on the mental health. And then we can talk a little bit more about the policy review and then where we go on from here.
Okay. Do we want to ask for questions? Okay, so I'll just remind everyone, it's important to just be recognized before you speak so that we make sure everyone has a turn to speak and that it's done in an orderly way. So does anyone have questions for Mr. Newkirk? None.
No, this is Al Rose speaking.
Oh, go ahead.
I think you brought clarity to the tasks that relate to the purview of the city. And that's where you can manage it as a project. And I think we are capable of doing that. We've got committed citizens and people to do this, and the way this is structured should work great. And yet we need to keep in mind, I think, a little larger, not as a task, but as a continuous focus, because we are a community task force, not a city council task force, thus they have the resolution. But we all know and share here in Marion that it's about human connection that matters. And so as we would address those kinds of things within the project, I think that it's incumbent upon all of us that as we do the work, that we do it in a way that is so open. And if it gets raw, it's not that we're stepping on each other's toes in any way, shape, or form. But we believe here that that is the essential agreement, a thing that needs to happen. And so in summary, it's kind of like we want to succeed as a city. We want to succeed as a community. But at the same time, we want individuals involved and every citizen to excel. And that's what puts the identity of Marion in a little different context. And so I welcome your analysis. I think personally, I would just say, I look forward to that kind of connection. I think we can produce some things with some timelines and targets and be on our way. So I'll just leave it there.
Thanks, Al. Anyone else? Okay, we'll move on to the next agenda item, which is the mental health liaison discussion. Chief, do you have an update on that?
I've got the first quarter statistics.
Thank you.
Quarter statistics from Foundation 2 came over last week. Again, we're with Brooke, we're at like a 65% success rate of stabilizing people in the community. Out of the people that she dealt with, there was roughly 43 crisis calls and 53 follow-ups during the first 3 months of this year. Only one wound up going to jail during that time that she was on scene and dealing with, which is a dramatic improvement from what we would have done before. 14% voluntary hospitalizations and 9% involuntary hospitalizations for 4 people out of the ones she's dealt with. She's taught at basic skills she had an hour block in there. She's really ingrained herself with the officers where they are constantly peppering her to come out with them. So she's been welcomed with open arms. She's gone down and worked with Mercy Hospital and their security staff through Foundation 2 on when people should be transported and when she can make that decision in the field as far as whether or not somebody is stabilized or not. In the past, they've relied a lot on the emergency room doctors, but she's got that background that she can make some of those calls. So she's made a lot of headway there. I think if I had any one reservation about the program is that I don't have 2 more of her to cover each shift. I would love to have 1 on each shift. Maybe we'll get there someday, but right now she's working mostly starts about 9 or 10 in the morning so she can catch some of the afternoon shift as well. Overnights, we're still using the mobile crisis to come in, and she's helped us in that regard too, to kind of get us a tighter relationship with them. But I can answer any questions or.
Are there any questions for the chief?
Chief, one, I think that's phenomenal. My question is there anything else that could be done? Not saying that you're not, that anything else that can be done to help try to find grants and stuff like that to help fund another person to do the other shifts?
Yeah, we had put in for a state grant and didn't get it. And I think what happened is several departments now are starting to catch on to how good this program is. And so everybody's got their hands out at this point. The BJA grants, I checked again last week. The one that Cedar Rapids has used in the past to fund theirs still isn't offered yet. And again, I think that may be just with the changeover in the administration at the White House that they're going to get their priorities in order before they offer those out. But I'm open to suggestions. We pay our contract with Foundation 2 is $65,000 a year. We did put it into our budget for next year, starting in July 1st. So we're good for another year. But if I could get grant funding, I would happily take it. And I really think that we could put somebody on the evening shift. I think we've got plenty of work for them.
But it sounds like you're actively looking for
Yeah.
additional funding.
Yep.
Okay. Go ahead, Jennifer.
So first of all, awesome. I'm so excited. And is it possible for, since this is a new initiative too, I think it'd be great to say from the beginning, we've had some stats on not only outcomes, but what is the breakdown of this?
Yep.
Like when you're looking at gender, race, and because I think that will help us too, and then that following up through that kind of review through the whole process of not only what was the call consisting of, but then the stabilization rate, and we can see if there's anything that we can work on or anything that's working really well.
Sure.
The other thing too is I thought about when you were talking about funding, being able to identify how many of these are youth involved, because juvenile justice might be a funding stream that could be looked into, but could be looked into if there is a high portion of these calls that are for youth.
I've got some of that foundation, and again, we got this from Foundation 2. 49% were male, 47% female. We had adults, 60%, 40% were youth. I do not have race, nationality broke down, and I can get that, and I'll ask them to put that on next quarter's report. I think the big thing for us is there's questions, and I've been kind of following up with what other departments are doing. When there was some discussion at the Iowa Police Chiefs Association meeting a couple of weeks ago about the co-responder model on having an officer in uniform going with the mental health liaison. We're kind of a hybrid on that. If it's a first time that Brooke is dealing with somebody, she's going to go with an officer just because we don't know what she's walking into. Once she's comfortable, when she's doing those follow-ups with the families or the individuals, she's usually by herself. So we've tried to kind of work through that. I think there's different mindsets and different ideas about what's the best way to approach it. We still haven't come up with a policy on how we're going to use her. We intentionally said, hey, we're going to wait 6 or 7 months to kind of see how it goes before we start drafting a policy. I've got some things in my head spinning around. I just have to sit down at some point and spit them out on paper and get them routed around. But so far, we've been happy with the way it's worked. Foundation 2 has been great. With our monthly meeting, they're very complimentary about our officers in the program. They think we're doing phenomenal, and they're actually bringing people to us to look at how we're doing things. Iowa City was just up a couple weeks ago that sat down with us to kind of see how we were doing it, to kind of try to model a little bit of their new program off of what we're doing already.
Great. You have another question? Go ahead.
I do have another question. The question being, is there any talk about this mental health liaison being able to intersect at all with the school resource officers and to be able to address the school to prison pipeline?
She does work with Tom Dobbs and Brian Davis, our 2 SROs. I know that they're communicating because I hear the calls come out over the radio, but I can dive a little deeper into that.
Other questions on this for the chief? Okay, yes, go ahead, Tom.
Just want to add some context and perspective. So one of the reasons I had suggested that the mental health liaison issue be on the agenda is because in speaking to everyone, it seems like this is something that you all agree has been done. It's been done well. And why? You may need more people in future. You need more data. You'll always hear updates from the chief. It's something that I think you can officially say, we have a plan on this. Let's now focus our energy on other areas of your task list. Not because the chief has got this in hand. Just the point is, focus on this and say, we've kind of got this ready to go to recommend to the council in the fall. Now we can focus our energy as a commission and as a group on other issues that have been languishing. That's the only point of trying to get some closure on this. And then of course the chief will always give updates for as he continues to get more information.
Okay, any thoughts on what Tom just said, or anyone who would be opposed to putting closure on this and focusing on other areas?
No, I think containing it in a progress kind of way was discussed. I think that's part of the project side of things, but simultaneously, on the people side, I would just suggest that Foundation 2 is a tremendous partner, as you mentioned. We are putting together a model with data. If we can see ourselves as partners, we could own the strategy to build other revenue sources in to our relationship. And so, having done the strategic plan for Foundation 2 a couple times over the years, finance is a big deal to them as well. How do we co-create a funding strategy, introducing the effect of that work on this community, business, industry, and other people who are interested in the city itself, and garner a way of getting money? So it's the project and the people, community.
That's a good point. Okay, other thoughts or other comments? Is there a general consensus that we can focus on other things and continue to have updates from the chief as they move forward with this program? I see heads nodding yes.
Yes, that sounds good to me.
Okay. Thank you. All right. Moving on to the next item on the agenda, number 4. Next steps regarding policy review. Who's handling that one? Is that Lon or
The
Amal?
manager will
Lon?
head that discussion.
Okay, city manager, go ahead.
Yeah, so one of the things that was brought to our attention early was that and I think it was Mayor that originally brought it up, was that the city of Marion needed to become a more welcoming organization. And so part of that really fundamentally goes down to 2 different areas about how the organization operates. One is the policies, but then it's the practices that support those policies. And in large part, really, then Tom will tell you, the subjectivity that gets introduced when the policy has as possibilities for interpretation. So what we've done is we've retained outside legal counsel under Kirsten's direction to do a wholesale update to all of the city's personnel policies. We have some that date quite a ways back, and we know that we have some that needed to be updated. So we'll start there with a comprehensive legal review, update them all, and really bring them into, make sure that they're completely in this century and this decade for sure, so that we'll have a fresh set to work with. When those are brought back in, then Kirsten and Tom will do a review, because and Tom in particular, based on his experience, can look at those and say, okay, these are the ones that I know are in my mental top 10 list that are at risk of bias. Now, what I think one of the things that he impressed upon me is that you can't ever probably completely eliminate the possibility for bias to creep into policies, but what you want to do is really minimize the risk. And so after the policies are put in place, that's where the training comes in for the individuals and looking at the practices that support it to really eliminate possibility for that to creep into your hiring process, your personnel evaluation process, your advancement process, your career path, and really integrate that into the thinking for the organization. So for example, one thing that we talked about, and this is just one, but I want to bring it out as kind of a highlight, is when you do your job applications, he's already talked about, are you requiring a degree when it may not necessarily be required for that position? But our ultimate goal would be to get to the point where when our HR process is fully mature, all the applications come in, HR has been centrally involved with it. They know what the department's looking for, what skill sets they need, what kind of a cultural fit that they're looking for. And then they'll do the screening of the applications, and the department gets a list of applicants that is completely blind for anything related to gender. There's no name, there's nothing in there other than the applicant's qualifications to make that selection. So there's no opportunity for any structural bias or any person's implicit bias to seep into that selection process. So there's two phases to it. One is getting the policy framework in place that we need, then creating the practices that support it, and ensuring that there's accountability and training for the staff to make sure that we're just absolutely doing everything we can to minimize the risk of bias impacting our personnel decisions. The other component is then really looking at how do we recruit? And this is an area where I'd really hope that we could garner something from the varied life experiences of the folks on this committee to understand, as a city, we do outreach in a couple of different ways. But if we're trying to really hit specific populations, are there things that we need to do differently? Where do we need to go to get information out to people and let them know in a broader reach that the city of Marion has openings? That isn't just for staff, that's for board and commission members when the mayor is looking at making appointments, to make sure that we're reaching the entire population. I mean, a lot of employers have really pushed that over, for example, to the digital side of the equation. So you use Facebook, you use internet sites. Well, if you're low income and don't have access to decent internet, you're not playing on the same playing field as those of us who might have gigabit internet connections at home. So we have to be cognizant of that as an organization and make sure that we don't have anything baked into those processes that is going to preclude people from joining our organization. And one of the things that I asked Tom, and I think this is why he's hammered a little bit tonight on bringing closure to some of these issues, is that when we make these changes, this isn't something that's going to show immediate results. And so, when we get this stuff done, we'll start to gather information, but it might be a year or 2 or 5 years before we really see big changes in the demographics of the makeup of the employees of the organization. So at some point we have to say, okay, we've got this in place. Now we need to wait for the data to be able to see what kind of an impact it has. And I didn't want to get distracted with constantly trying to tweak it or work on it or have it constantly show up there until we know for sure that what we have done has absolutely worked. So that's kind of where things sit. I don't know if we have a timeline yet. Kirsten, if you've heard from our attorney.
We did. I think we established, Amal, correct me if I'm wrong, but the end of July. The end of July. There's some policies that need to be included. We had some policies in a couple different locations. They need to be consolidated. She will go through with her review lens on, and then I will do the same, and then we will be able to present that to Tom to work with his lens on it. So
Okay, is that all, Lon?
Yeah.
Okay, we'll take questions for Lon, so go ahead, Jennifer.
Of course I have questions.
That's great. We
So-
count on you.
So you had mentioned that focused a lot on recruiting and welcoming and retaining. What, along with this, are there also going to be, are the policies regarding interventions needed, concern, like if there are concerns, what's the policy, like, a grievance policy or are those also being reviewed? So that way there is a pathway to be able to address issues that might be coming up?
Yeah, and I focus a lot on recruitment and that side of things, but I didn't really talk about ensuring that the application of policies is equitable, so that you make sure that if someone's doing even a personnel review or looking at a disciplinary process, that because of someone's gender, race, whatever the descriptor may be, that they're not being treated differently than someone else would be in the organization. So there's an accountability process for that, and there would be training specific to that for our supervisors. I think, one of the things that we have to make sure we focus on as an organization is that when you're recruiting like the department head level positions, those are ones that are coming in or coming up through the organization with professional training, background, leadership. They've learned how to do staff evaluations and everything, but we have 1 or 2 layers of other supervisors that may have come up more through the working ranks and just aren't quite there yet. So they're going to need some supplemental training and background on those types of issues as well.
I have a question, if I may. You had mentioned the grievance process. So were you also looking to understand if someone did have a complaint or concern, what that path looks like?
Yes, and then you used the D word, disciplinary action, and I was like, because I could not think of it, so thank you, Lon. But yeah, I think that there is just making sure that that's also being looked at, that there is an avenue to address issues, and that there is a way for people's voices to be heard, a way for people to understand a resolution to those concerns, and whether that be all like internal of Marion stat employees, but also like the community as well. So I think when we talk about it ties in, I think, with the idea of just transparency when it comes to what it is we do and how we do it. So
Yeah, certainly relative to our city employees, a lot of what you just referenced would be included in an anti-harassment or retaliation policy. Much of it will be there. But this is one of those topics where you really need a multi-prong approach. There is no silver bullet. Different things resonate differently with different people. So we need to be doing all of it. Yes, we need to have a policy in place that outlines the steps someone can take. There also needs to be, as Lon said, extensive leadership coaching and development in this area. It's never done. This is kind of a living, breathing initiative that's never done, and we need to keep it alive and well kind of by talking about it and reminding people that, we can't get lazy with this. We need to keep our eyes on it all the time, and keeping it alive and well makes that happen. So.
Okay, Tom, go ahead.
Sure. And this is where I want to offer some perspective that helps keep it focused. So the purpose of this was just simply to have Lon kind of update what's being done. It's entirely the goal that maybe in the July meeting or maybe the August meeting, potentially, depending on the timing of the review by the attorney, that Kirsten and I would kind of like have a more open discussion about this policy review, about their approaches, about their data collection, where you would get the feedback of the community, of citizenry, of individuals with subject matter expertise, some of whom are on this task force, Ms. Stumble and others who have subject matter expertise in this area as well, and get a communal effort to say, what are they missing? What are we missing? What about a grievance policy? What should it look like? What about, progressive discipline? How does that look? How can we do training on bias and cultural awareness? So the idea is just give you guys just an update that this is a big issue. Let's set it for a meeting where we can actually sit down and talk about it as a group, where again, to help you move faster and more effectively, you can actually focus on this issue as opposed to dividing it up among various things. So I want to make sure you all understand that was our plan. And then the timing of it, whether it's July or August, may depend on what the attorney reviewed and also the information that Kirsten has. But that would be the general idea of when the next time we'd have an in-depth discussion about this section of this problem.
Yeah, I think that timeline's worst case scenario. We added some squish to it just in case, but I think that would be worst case scenario.
That makes sense.
Yeah, I didn't mean to dive deep. It was more than just, I heard the front end and I want to make sure the back end was also.
No, it's good, but it prompted
Yeah.
Tom's comments, so that's great.
Just
Yeah.
wanted to mention that Kristen is just 6 months in her role, just like police chief. She's trying to figure out the whole process, and I'm sure when she's done with her review and her approach to HR director, it will be airtight. And from a city's perspective, it's a commitment for us to actually accountability is one of our leadership values, leadership strategies. So it's a commitment for us and also commitment to continuous improvement. So it's going to be
And
a long-term.
the sheer fact of having a HR director, which she's our first HR director. We've finally grown up enough as a city that we can have an HR director, but having that position, you know, is a major step forward to make progress on these issues. So.
Yeah, and really, I mean, one of the things that having that as a centralized function will do is drive consistency across the organization. Prior to looking at centralizing this, the departments were doing their individual hiring, individual discipline, and some of it is by necessity. I mean, we have several departments that have to do the civil service process versus ones that don't. So there are some legal things that we have to be able to comply with. But what we want to do is bring that consistency and predictability to the process so that people coming into the city are going through the same thing regardless of what division, what department you're applying for, and that we ensure that we've got the process as airtight as we can to ensure that we're not precluding anybody from joining the organization.
Anyone else with questions or comments or input on this topic? I see Cersei has joined us. Welcome, Cersei. Anyone else? Okay. Seeing that there are no further comments, we will move on to the next item on the agenda, number 5, subcommittee update and discussion. Who's leading this? Okay, Tom, go ahead.
The reason I'm only leading this is because I'm giving you feedback that in speaking to the groups, my general impression was that the use and reliance on subcommittees may not be as effective or as necessary as maybe once thought. For example, a couple of subcommittees. One is on, I think, policing. One is on, I think, communication with the Human Rights Commission. And I think that those are two very separate things the task force as a whole should deal with. As I said, we want to move to get to a let's talk about equitable policing as a task force, and then let's move on to how do we communicate with everyone else versus a group. So my impression from the subcommittees was, and this maybe everyone needs to pipe in, that maybe moving on from those subcommittees and then refocusing our energy on these very specific topics to kind of move us down the road, like in this task approach Mr. Rowe had talked about. So that was the impression of the purpose of the subcommittee discussion, not so much to get an update, but of course, anybody wants to have an update, they of course can. But that was my perspective. I wanted to offer it.
Okay, and I think one of the things that we encountered is that there was so much interest in people wanting to be on the policing subcommittee that it was going to be almost virtually the entire task force anyway. And so if that was going to be the case, then we might as well just involve everybody on it.
And the theory would be, well, just to follow up on that, that again, once we get through the policy review, or maybe beforehand, we'll have a meeting on equitable policing. Then we'll talk about how do we communicate this as a separate entity, where you have a whole discussion where you get to go down the rabbit holes and down the discussion groups and get the input of the community in a very effective way on that issue, as opposed to kind of dividing your brain power in the same meeting. At least that's more, I think, more efficient and effective. But it was the subcommittees who suggested not me trying to suggest they get rid of the subcommittees, but the subcommittees were kind of on board to say, maybe this is a good path to go down as opposed to continuing the subcommittees.
Interesting. Okay. Any thoughts on that? Comments?
I believe Ms. Xerxes.
I wouldn't. Yeah.
Go ahead.
Hi,
Susan.
sorry. Apologies for being late. I had some technical problems. I'm on the road. I don't remember us talking about this as a subcommittee, so I don't think I'm not sure it came out of the subcommittees, but it sounds like that was what, Tom, you're suggesting is what came out of the individual meetings you had. Is that what you're saying?
That's fair, Cersei. Yes. I didn't discuss I talked to the Human Rights Commission, Civil Rights, I apologize, subcommittee, and you're on a separate, and then I did not talk to the policing subcommittee, just people who may have been on it. So that's kind of what my impression was.
Were you able to hear that, Cersei?
I was, thank you. Yeah, after a minute. And that's, if we can get into the conversations about policing, and if the, I love it that there was such interest on the task force members to be on the subcommittee, that I think you're right. If everyone wants to be on the subcommittee, then it needs to just be a meeting of the whole. I just wanted to be clear that as a subcommittee, we hadn't talked about this as a possible move.
That is true. Just my impression.
Okay. And I think what Tom is, correct me if I'm wrong, but what you're suggesting is that we should start taking these meetings and focusing on a topic and digging into it in these meetings as a full committee. Okay. Okay. Jennifer, or did anyone else have anything first? Since Jennifer's on, did you? Oh, go ahead, Jennifer. Yeah.
Do we need to make a decision today? Like, is this one of these topics that we need to say, you know what, we're gonna go ahead and, great in theory, but in practice it wasn't working having these subcommittees, and we need to really all be in agreement and have a consensus that we're moving forward together versus like this parse, separated out kind of effort. Like, because I think that will, I don't, if people think that we're working within subcommittees, and then they may not think that, oh, this is the time when I need to be working on this or doing this, because it's the whole task force, when they're like, oh no, I'm going to wait for the subcommittee to tell me. So just structure wise, do we need to make a decision on as a task force if we want to keep these subcommittees tonight?
I would suggest you do so, because I got no impression that anyone in the subcommittees was so in love with the subcommittees that they would be disappointed if they went, if we went more focused. That was my impression. So I suggest that your point is, don't let the minds be divided. Either make a decision and move forward, or continue. Is that what you're suggesting, Jennifer?
That is what I'm suggesting.
Yeah, I
So
think
then,
that's wise.
getting all ruly and stuff, like, do I need to make a motion or something, or?
If I may,
Sure,
Hey, Josh.
but let's take more comments and then we'll do that. Go ahead.
if I may, as I was only allowed to be a proxy for Mike in the subcommittee, operating with Ms. Xerxes as one of the tasks, as a representative from MAR. And I'd have to beg the pardon to say that I agree and somewhat disagree to the point. For one, as you already stated, and I believe they've had great conversation with you, but I don't think, as you said, the policing subcommittee didn't get to have that conversation just yet either. And was that me? And I just believe that, one, to make a decision based off of one conversation would be kind of a rush. And I said that to say this: the subcommittees only had, the policing subcommittee, from my memory, and you can remind me if I'm wrong, has only had one conversation. And yet that one conversation has been documented in the minutes, and it was a pretty decent conversation and a pretty decent meeting. But yet I have yet to see what the full capacity would be if we had a great agenda to what it could be, besides just doing a whole group meeting. Now, am I against all of us having that conversation in that meeting? None whatsoever. I'm for that if we are committed to having a full conversation about it, and not just on basing points on what we want to talk about, but the whole statistics about what we're going to do about the policing, all in general. That's where I stand.
Tom will address that.
Go ahead, Tom.
Mr. Milan?
Yes, sir.
Okay, so I didn't know your last name. Sorry.
No, you're all right.
It's okay. So to update you, absolutely. I've had a great conversation with Chief Kitzmiller and about digging deeper into the issues that he faces in the department, and the whole purpose of the refocusing is to have a task force meeting.
Yes.
Where you can come in and you can dig deeply into the issues of equitable policing. For example, Chief Kitzmiller has things, he's listed them a couple of times, the accomplishments he feels he's done, and some of those are very, very good. But no one's felt they've had a good time to have, well, let's have a discussion.
Yes.
Is the data collection on track? Does that make sense? What
Yes.
about the review board? Do we
Yeah.
need that? I mean, just getting into the details of it in an effective way. And the whole purpose of this is not to push something under the table at all, but to actually create an exposed way so that you can have an honest discussion about it, with Chief Kitzmiller showing the things that he's done, getting some feedback on it, and then deciding how far does this committee, this task force want to go down this road of managing equitable policing. And again, maybe making yourself a model in the way that the mental health liaison has been, and the thing that makes Marion proud of what Marion's approach to this is. That's the whole goal of it, not in any way. So I just want to make sure you had that context for why the subcommittee wouldn't be necessarily as important. It's not about covering anything. It's about exposing and getting
Yes.
down the rabbit hole, if you will, getting the full discussion on it.
Yes.
So very soon we could have a meeting that the only topic on the agenda is policing. And
Policing,
we
yep.
could have that conversation and, okay. I mean, I think it's important for everybody that this is what you're envisioning, right?
Yes,
Okay.
Yes, sir.
absolutely.
Anyone else? Any other comments? Input?
And one final thing is that the advantage of having kind of me in the room is that if there are concerns of any particular task member or a subcommittee member about, hey, this isn't being discussed. I had some discussions, good discussions with everyone, that you can have those discussions. They don't necessarily have to be in this particular room. And then I can maybe help bring those into the agenda or have a discussion point about them and discuss them in an effective way, bring that together. So kind of it's a backdoor kind of connection that could also help supplement these conversations. So that helps you decide that that's all I had.
So is it, do we need to vote on this, or do we go by consensus like we did with the other item, or what's your thoughts?
I think for clarity's purposes, if the consensus of the group is to move away from subcommittees and just continue the work focused on the policing issue for sure, and maybe something else that might come up as a whole, then we would want to do a motion second and have a vote on that. So that's part of the record.
And anyone interested in making such a motion? Jennifer?
I would like to make the motion that we dissolve the subcommittees and work as just one entity collectively, and to be able to really take a deep look at issues as they are identified.
I would second that motion.
Okay, so it's been moved and seconded that we dissolve the subcommittees and work together as one large group on specific topics, specific issues. Does that accurately state your motion? Okay, so it's been moved and seconded. Any discussion on the motion before we vote? Okay, we'll take a vote then. All those in favor, please say aye. Aye.
Aye.
All those opposed, please say no. Okay, I didn't hear any no's. Motion passes. Anything else on this topic before we move on? Want to make sure everyone has a chance to weigh in on things. Okay. Then the next item is number 6, proxy discussion. Who's leading that one? Lon? Okay,
I'll
go
take
ahead.
that one. So the reason I wanted to bring this up is, one, we've seen some transitions. Just to call it out, Mayor is the only organization that has proxies, and our proxies are having a tendency to become full members of the commission. So we wanted to, one, acknowledge that, but also that with that happening, now the ranks of the proxies are a little bit depleted. But as we move into July, this will be the last meeting that we would intend to have where it's kind of a hybrid of in-person and Zoom. In July, we're anticipating that all of our meetings are going to move back to in-person format. We still do anticipate that we will use electronic media, but it's going to be more one way. I mean, it's just going to be, we'll broadcast this out, but people would not be participating or making public comment or holding public hearings through the broadcast. And so I guess in light of that, I wanted to get some feedback on the group as we're going into live. And I mean, we have groups, Mayor in particular, who has a lot of members that I would think are probably going to see an uptick in attendance at our meetings. Do we still feel that it's going to be necessary to have proxies as we're moving into having those more open discussions and back more towards what, I guess, the way we're used to operating?
When you refer to mayor, you might say the alliance, because
The
it sounds like
alliance,
you're saying
sorry.
mayor. So
Well, the mayor
we
does have a
don't want
large,
to confuse people, so.
the
yeah.
mayor does have a large group of supporters as well, but perhaps we don't call them members.
Sorry, I didn't mean to detract from your comments, but
Clarification, because I also was
Sure.
hearing that message as mayor. And so I
Sounds
was like,
Mar.
and so I was trying to like understand what it was that you were saying. So there are designees on this task force, and then the proxies are like to if the designee can't be here, correct?
Yep, they'll fill in when the primary members of the alliance were not able to attend to ensure continuity, messaging was getting back, and just to make sure that we always had that presence for the full task force. I guess like my question is, like I said, just as we're moving into doing things more live and more people will have the opportunity to attend, are we still going to need that for continuity, for the people to have opportunities to interact, ask questions, make public comment on issues that might be coming up? As we get into doing this, I think our agenda will start adding some items in there where we'll talk about this under 7 about whether we want to establish like a public comment period and some of those types of things to allow for more input from not only members of the alliance, but members of the community at large.
I'd just make a comment. I'm not sure what preceded the strategy to form the committee to begin with and what ownership you have for how you went about it, okay? But my personal position would be the nature of this work is non-exclusive. It's to include everybody at every turn all the time. That's the nature of the topic we are talking about. And so I don't know who's on the list, who's in transition. I know a couple of people might be on transition and we're excited for them and their aspirations. And the remaining group has a lot of aspirations too. And so my own personal take is, and I know there were probably other people who applied and were told they didn't make it. So that's the only unknown that I'm not going to speak to that. But I would say that the people who've been engaged thus far should stay involved. And it's a non-exclusive because they all bring a picture of the truth, and we all have partial truths when we start dealing with these topics. And so I'm for non-exclusion with the existing people who've been diligently coming through via Zoom and the like. But I can be persuaded in other ways, so.
Jennifer?
But this would be an example that, for me, thinking of, then I would want to make sure that our membership is racially and gender balanced. And so, and I know that the primaries, that was definitely like considered, at least gender was considered, I know that. And so I want to make sure that any move we make would not have an unintentional consequence of excluding any individuals from participating because of and limit the number because of circumstances. I mean, this is a meeting that's right at 5 o'clock. I'm fortunate enough that I recognize my privilege that I can leave work and drive over here, but not everybody has that. And so are we, if we, I want to put that out there, that this is an example of how we would look at what are there unintended consequences for that would disproportionately impact based on race or gender if we make this decision of proxies or no proxies.
Okay, so, I mean,
That's just my comment.
right, so
Oh,
what I'm
alright.
trying to understand though, do you think no proxies is, would tend, would create a situation that you want to avoid, or is that, or is it the having proxies or?
What I would like to see is that it's part of the decision that goes into whether or not there are proxies. If we look at having proxies be involved, does that create an imbalance then?
I see.
And if it does, then what are we going to do to rectify that? And what does
I
that
see,
look like?
okay.
Or if we say it's only the designees, are we then maybe shutting out some people that were designated, but due to, you know, some circumstances, they're not able to attend these meetings, so that's where the proxy's been attending it. And then do we get out of balance because we've limited ourselves too much? Or do we get out of balance because we've expanded?
So whichever way, there are risks to the situation you're trying to avoid. Okay,
If I may.
yes, go ahead, Josh.
If I may, if you haven't noticed, or if you have noticed, my only position here has only been as a proxy. I'm Mike's proxy, but I'm here at the support of Mrs. Stumbo, who is an actual member of the task force, which Mike is an actual member of the task force. And if you've noticed my presence, I've never voted, nor I've made very vague comments. My job is only to receive information, allow Ms. Stumbo to be the mouthpiece and conversate amongst that, but never to fully vote or anything. She did the voting, or whoever was the task member did the voting. My suggestion would be if you eliminate the proxy, that also eliminates them from having a part, because all we are is just the eyes and ears and not necessarily the mouthpiece. But the proxy is just to hold the place and just to receive the information so that they don't drop the ball. My whole position here has been just so that Mike does not drop the ball. That's why I've been present. I only speak when I need to speak and when I'm supposed to speak, but I only here to retain information. I strongly believe as the place of a proxy, and you can make the suggestion yourself, but the place of a proxy is very, I believe, is important due to the fact that this, as our own, I want to say our mediator has stated himself, this work is beyond the work of a city, but it's going to take more. So even the work on this task force is going to take more than just a few members on this task force to do it. And if one is out of place, it's only befitting that somebody be able to sit there just to take up the role, not to do anything, to make any changes or anything, but just to make sure that the information is necessary. And especially to be a part of the Marion Alliance in the place of a proxy. I would strongly believe that you would want somebody who represents the Marion Alliance to have some type of proxy in place, just to play a part, to make sure that the record is straight and that there is no involvement of outside sources.
Thank you. Yeah, Emma.
This task force is designed in a way to always have representation from each entity. That's why the design is to have 2 members from Marion Alliance, for example, and that the expectation that that serving member is going to serve on behalf of the organization, and I think it will help our goal better if the conversation is continued with one person. That's my perspective.
So I actually, I have to say, when the Marion Alliance was given 2 seats on the task force, it was in recognition of the work and the representation. So we've always went into this knowing that we had 2 seats and being, I think, quite responsible by also having alternates who attend every meeting, so that we know as a team and can go back to the larger group and share both the information and know that we're representing well the commitments and beliefs of the organization. And so having the proxies or the alternates at the table, our commitment has been that that helps to ensure continuity, so that when things do happen and when tragedies occur and when life circumstances change, we can seamlessly continue to represent the Marion Alliance. And the 2 seats were intentional. I believe fully it was about ensuring representation from a group within the community that called for this work to be underway. And so that was what the city council approved. And I don't think that the idea of changing that is on the table right now. The proxies allow us to continue to have that full representation when things do get in the way. So I don't think there's a reason to get rid of it. We will continue to be participating. We'll continue to have our alternates or proxies in the audience when we can come face to face. I'll be glad when we can do that face to face, and I'll be there. And I don't think there's a reason to need to change having the voice at the table and the way the open meeting rules work. It's important that we have representation at the meetings.
But
I'm sorry. Frederick, is that you? Or no?
Chief.
Oh,
That was
Chief.
me.
Oh, sorry.
You were looking at the screen. I'm like, I'm over here.
Sorry.
But I guess I thought that's why we had two members from the Marion Alliance, is so there was always somebody there. So if I'm not here, I don't send a proxy from the police department. I mean, I rely on Lon or Kirsten or Amal to tell me, kind of fill me in on what happened so we can catch up. I will say, in the beginning, we had both members and both proxies. So we had 4 people on the early meetings, the full meetings, which again, I thought the idea of the proxy was to take somebody's place if we needed it. But I also see that if you've got 2 representatives on the full task force and somebody can't make it, to me, that other person can fill in the blanks for them.
And I think it's creating more confusion. Just every meeting will have a different face, and we expectation that the conversation is continued and the meeting is open to the public, of course, and we will be meeting in person. Everybody is welcome to attend the meeting.
I don't know if you were on,
But
Cersei,
when-
that July is when we anticipate going back to a more normal posture. So we'd have meetings face to face, but also the public would be able to attend, and that we will be doing, still be using electronic, but it would be one way only.
Yeah, I did hear that. And if the public is able to attend but not speak. And that's the key, is that when you're at the table, you can participate in the discussion. And we feel strongly that that there were 2 members of the Marion Alliance put on this, not because if one of us isn't there, the other can speak. It's because we represent a core body of concerned citizens who have committed to being in the work and engaged. And from the beginning, we only ever had 2 people at the table. We had alternates listening and participating as other members of the public could. But when you're an alternate, you're not given a panelist position in a Zoom, and you're not able to speak during meetings. So it matters deeply to us that we have our both representation on the task force. And I think we've demonstrated our commitment to being there, and we meet in between regularly so that we can ensure that we are representing not just what do I, Cersei Stumbo, think, but how can I represent the interests and the needs and expectations of the Marion Alliance. Having the alternate able to fill in when we are not there means that we continue to get to have that full representation of the community, and the community who's particularly concerned and committed to this work.
Go ahead. Did you have a question? Oh, I'm
She
sorry.
pretty much hit that.
Oh, okay.
nail on the head.
Okay, Jennifer.
So I'm going to speak from the perspective of being a civil rights commissioner, commission representative, because we also have 2 spots on this task force. And it was my understanding that way we are meant to be at every single meeting, both of us, both Fred and myself. However, if something were to happen where I couldn't attend a meeting, at least Fred was still going to be at this meeting. So I don't have an alternative. So I'm using it as a comparison to the Alliance, because I don't have an alternate person that would come in place of me. So I don't know. I'm not clearly understanding what, like.
So this is Fred. That's not entirely true. Jennifer, you actually do have alternate backup, and so do I.
I don't even know who those people are though.
Oh, I can talk to you offline about it, but
Okay. So we have, okay, then I forget, then don't mind what I'm saying. It's just, my thought was that apparently there's a different system than what I'm even aware, because I just plan on being at the meetings.
It was
So-
discussed at Civil Rights Commission, but there was never a need because you're committed to being here in the meeting. And honestly, the design itself, we had 2 members to make sure we have always in the task force, if there's a quorum, we always have representation.
Go ahead, Tom.
I feel that you've made progress and you're getting close to an end result. And maybe making some kind of big change on this may not be necessary. I appreciate the Alliance's position. May I ask, my understanding is seriously that maybe Mr. Darrow cannot be on this task force any longer. Is that correct?
Correct.
Okay. So
That is correct, yeah.
possible to replace him with Mr. Milan? Is it possible just to do that and solve the issue?
Yeah, I think, I believe.
Yeah, we have requested that, and that will need to go to the city council. And if that wasn't in place, he wouldn't be at the table. If we didn't have him as an alternate, he would not be able to speak tonight. He would be participating by Zoom and he wouldn't be able to speak. But because he's an alternate, he is able to be at the table tonight and be a part of the discussion. Frankly, I think it would be fabulous if we had an alternate for the chief and for others. I think, I think as Al was saying, the idea is to be as open as we can. And I'd rather go the other way to encourage folks to have backups who attend and know the conversation and know the work and can be there when someone can't be there. Because I think if the chief can't be here, and there are times when that happens, we do better when the chief is at the table and when someone from the police department would be represented. I would welcome that. So it's more of I'd rather be as open and inclusive as we can, as opposed to closing it down by getting rid of the opportunity for the alternates to participate.
Mr. Milan, can the Alliance commit to Mr. Milan being here as the proxy consistently through like the next few months? Is that possible?
Well, I think
We've already made that commitment.
Okay. Like I said, to me, the primary issue is, and to go against what you just said, Cersei, in terms of the chief having an alternate, is that to me, once you start focusing on topics, you want to have consistency of knowledge. And so the reason to have, the same 2 individuals from the Alliance coming in generally, if you can, generally, hopefully that's consistent, is to have the knowledge be consistent. So I don't have to re-explain something to you versus someone else. And the same is true with the chief. I wouldn't necessarily want him to send someone else from his office who has no clue what we've talked about before. And I understand why you're making that point, Cersei, actually, but I think personally that you guys are close. And I think that given the elephants in the room and the issues raised by Ms. Tibbetts, the issues raised by Mr. Rowe, that, finding a path to allow Mr. Milan to continue forward, I think would be wise if I were you. That's just my perspective.
I think
I'm not a voting person.
Well, and our alternate is Anna Clymer is our second alternate, and she is in attendance. She's been in attendance at every single task force meeting. That was our commitment when we asked for the alternates, because of that very reason. We wanted to make sure there was continuity of discussion, and that we don't miss a beat, and that we don't even miss it, that we don't lose quorum, and all of those sorts of things are part of keeping the work moving and keeping it continuous.
I would just like, again, remind everybody, please be recognized before you speak so that we have orderly discussion. Thank you. But I just wanted to add that the plan is that on the next city council agenda, Mr. Milan would be appointed to actually fill the seat. So he would be a full member of the task force. And that's in our, correct me if I'm wrong, Lon, but that's in our plan, that would be on the next council agenda. I think I fully appreciate what everybody's saying, and I think the whole idea though is that, or the concern might be that we just, every time there's a change, we have to wait for the next council meeting and have it, because this is a city council appointed group. And so, you know, to the extent we can avoid lots of changes, and, you know, it just would be better. And again, it's important to have that conversation with consistent representation, the same people, so that you can move forward. But I fully appreciate what the members of the Alliance are saying.
So do we have a motion on the floor with a second? Don't we?
No, not for this.
No, we already closed the one in the subcommittees. There's been
Okay.
nothing on this.
Yeah,
So
there's no
that-
motion on this yet.
All right, then let me just conclude by asking this. Structure that we're talking about here is something that keeps us separated. The agenda that we agreed to move forward on is what we're all getting centered on, okay? And so my question is there a deadline for us to submit a report or a recommendation to the city council? And at that point in time, what is the existence of this particular group? And I think I don't need an answer right now, but I think that's germane as it relates to our commitment to the work and where the recommendations will lead us, and the maturity that we experience along the way as a group. So that would kind of situate this, I think, a little bit.
Thank you. Tom?
It's my view that this task force should be in a position to make a recommendation on closed items that need work into the future, of course, like data collection, et cetera, will go on for months and months and many years, by this fall. You know, whether, we'll have a discussion about eco-policing, in August, September at the latest, probably earlier than August if we can. And then you move on to this other topic, and then you should be able to position to kind of have some, so the point is, to your point, Mr. Rowe, is that commitment through October, let's say. And then at that point you say, does the task force still exist? In what form does it exist? Do you then go back to a more specific limited group, or you do not have it exist? Maybe October is aggressive, but that's kind of my thought and vision for it. And then, maybe it goes on in November, but the point is it's not going on to endless discussions all the way into the next spring. There's a point where I think you can get to a point of closure sooner than you think. And that if Mr. Milan can commit, if the Alliance can commit to those two individuals, I think that you make that work till then, I think.
And
Please go ahead.
for the sake of the recording, my last name is Milam.
Milam?
Milam. But I know who you're talking to, though.
Sorry, Judge.
No,
Milam.
you're all right.
I just followed Tom's lead, so sorry about that.
No,
Speaking
you're
as a
all-
Pluckhon, I feel your pain.
Well, and of course, with my last name, I've heard every possible pronunciation, so. Okay, well, sorry about that. We'll get it right. Okay, so where does that leave us on this topic? I think that I guess my personal view is that the potential of having this be, an unnecessary detractor, this topic, I think, I would be in favor of just proceeding the way we have. We appoint Mr. Milam to be the full representative, and and expect that the two representatives are going to be participating, except when they're not able to be here, and they can have a proxy. But we need the proxy. If there's going to be another proxy then named, we need to know that so that we can have that person appointed. But that would just be my feeling.
I'm seeing a lot of nods of assent.
Okay, I see Al has to leave us for another meeting, but we certainly understand and appreciate it. No, yeah, absolutely. Thank you.
Very good meeting. Thank you.
Okay, we have one final item on the agenda for discussion, which is regarding agenda format and items.
So I thought I would start this one off with a little bit of a primer on the open meetings law and how that works for the state. So the the core issue with an agenda and for matters of public consideration comes down to constructive notice of the topics that are going to be discussed, and that the public has to have proper notice of the specific topics that are going to be discussed. So even if you look at the city council meetings, we have opportunities on the agenda for structured public comments. So at the beginning of the meeting, there's an opportunity for the public to weigh in on items on the agenda that do not contain a public hearing. Public hearing, again, mayor opens a public hearing. People are invited to speak for or against. The public hearing is concluded, and then the council moves on to action. What happened is several years ago, the legislature created a new organization called the Iowa Public Information Board, and IPIB started issuing recommendations based on review of public agendas and how they were structured. We used to have an item on there that was just called like council discussion time, and it could actually be a discussion back and forth amongst council members on specific topics. Now, someone at the end of the meeting can come in and make a statement to the city council about a topic. They can talk about something, say, this is what I think, but you'll notice that the city council does not engage them in back and forth discussion on the topic. That's because the public, without having constructive notice, would not know to attend or tune into that meeting, and therefore would miss the opportunity to equally weigh in on that particular topic. So that's why our agenda process is pretty structured and a lot more detailed than it used to be, so that we ensure that the public is adequately notified about the topics that we want to address on a particular agenda. Now, as far as setting the agenda itself, the agendas have to be published 48 hours in advance of the meeting unless it's an emergency meeting. And even in an emergency meeting, it's got a minimum of 24 hours of minimum notice requirements. So all of what we do is really driven by making sure that the agenda meets those standards from the Public Information Board. In general terms, as far as getting items on the agenda, if there are topics that people want to have placed on the agenda, the mayor functions as a gatekeeper for the agenda. In his absence, Colette functions as a gatekeeper for what's going to be placed on the agenda. But like with the city council or our other boards and commissions, if there are two council members or two board or commission members that want to see an item placed on the agenda for discussion, they have the prerogative to be able to do that. So if we heard from a couple of members of the task force that we would like to have this item placed on there, that would be the prerogative that we could go ahead and place that item on the agenda for discussion the next time around. Even as we look at our agenda format, especially now that we're going to be returning more towards open session, I would suspect that we probably would want to place a topic on there, a standing topic for public comment, so that people could weigh in on things that we're going to talk about, open to whether or not you feel like it needs to be like we structure with council, where it would be at the beginning, there's a comment period for items on the agenda, or at the end where people can come in and say, I think the task force should consider this. What'll often happen, I'll use a terrible example because it's something that still gives me facial tics to this day, RV parking ordinances. That could be brought up at the end of a city council meeting. The mayor could say, let's place that on the agenda for the next council meeting for consideration. So items can be placed on the agenda that way as well.
Is that clear? Questions for Lon? Okay, so that brings us to
So
the end.
can you, I'm sorry.
Go ahead.
What?
May I
Go
ask a
ahead.
question?
Yes.
Sorry. So if we do want something placed on the agenda, what's the best way? Is it to send an email to you, Mayor, or what's the best way for us to ask to have something on the agenda?
I think Amal probably has the best availability. So if you just send everything over to Amal, she can ensure that it gets circulated.
Okay, and if two of us are requesting it, it goes on the agenda, or is it up to someone else's discretion about what items ultimately get on the agenda?
That's our normal process. The only time that would typically get altered would be as if it's already, if we're looking and it's already contained in another agenda item, for example.
Mm-hmm.
Or if we have too many items on the agenda, considering the time.
Yep. But even if that's the case, we would normally let the people know that we've got 11 items on the next agenda. We aren't going to be able to get to it. We'll place it on the agenda after that so that people know when it might come up. a lot of times, especially if it's a member of the public that asks that the city council consider something, we might receive that through email. We'll let them know the city council meeting where it's going to be discussed. And we could do the same thing with the task force.
Okay. Another thing I've done in other sessions is to have the last item on the agenda be agenda items for the future, so that you can at least get a sense of if there's 25 things and 3 of them everyone is interested in. It doesn't necessarily have to be formal, but at least a way for the group to weigh in on what matters. Just an idea.
That's what we use the other council discussion section at the end. It's just the council can't engage back and forth in a discussion about it. But if someone brings up a topic and says, I think this is something that we should talk about, another member can weigh in and say, I would support that. And then we'll put it on the next agenda. You just can't talk back and forth about that topic because the public wouldn't have been notified that it was going to be discussed.
Tom, you have a comment?
I do. I want just to add a little more perspective, as I know this agenda issue had come up before I got involved a little bit more. And I think that the goal of this, by showing I got some things on the agenda this time that were directly responsive to, I think, what we discussed about in these outside meetings. The goal would be in July, we put very specific 1 or 2 key topics on the agenda to get a full, robust discussion. As I said, it might be the policy review with Ms. Fisher and myself. It might be equitable policing. We'd probably give people notice of that. And so therefore, for example, I encourage all of you, you can put anything on the agenda, I suppose you'd like, but if the purpose of having a robust discussion about equitable policing is in August, let's have our subtopics and agenda items be related to that. You know what I mean? And then and then at least give a chance for the focused approach to work. And then I think when you start to realize you start to corral some of these issues, equitable policing, the policy review, communication, et cetera, then you can have another suggestion, say, what are we missing here? Let's put that on the agenda for September. Again, I'm being maybe more aggressive in my timeline than is reasonable, but just for example. And so I think that's what we do, hopefully. And so therefore, if the policy review comes up in July, and that's what we hope to do, that, you know, for example, if Ms. Tibbetts says something she wants to put on the agenda, but of course, the purpose of the robust discussion is to be able to talk about a whole host of things under that topic. So you wouldn't need to necessarily put a bunch of minutia agenda items on there to get it discussed, at least in my view. So I just wanted to have that perspective, Ms. Stumbo, so you know that that's kind of the goal going forward. And also anybody who has things that they think should be related to the agenda item certainly can contact me and suggest, is this related to it? Don't miss this kind of a thing. And I'm glad to propose that as well.
I think I would rely on our consultant because he's guiding the conversation and how we design our future agenda. I would like you to weigh heavily on how we design the agenda itself to serve the overall conversation, because we have a good idea right now on time frame and a plan.
Truly, the only question that I have is simply this: will Ms. Fisher be in a position to have a rational, robust discussion on the policy and the personnel issues by July, or will she not? She may not be. Maybe she needs till August because of what the attorney's doing, in which case we need to switch out something else for the July agenda. It might be, you know, one aspect of equitable policing and talk to Chief Kitts. So that might be what we do, but it's not going to be, or maybe it's about communicating to the public, though I don't think you're ready for that discussion yet personally. I think you've got to wait for that. But those are just some, it's not a million options here is my point. There's only a couple of 3 key topics you guys need to start hitting in the next meeting, 2 meetings, 3 meetings, in my opinion. And they may switch out, but only because we don't want the discussion to be less than robust if you're not ready for it. You know, that's my only thing that I would suggest.
Thank you. Chief, go ahead.
When is the next meeting? Is it July 8th?
15th.
15th, I think.
Okay.
15th.
Okay. I'm just out of town that week of the 8th, so I was.
And that may be, yeah.
Okay. Anything else on this topic? Just following up, and this is, since it's not on the agenda, I don't want to have discussion on it, but Jennifer made a comment about the time of the meeting. If anyone has concerns, or if you think it's inhibiting anybody or causing an issue for people participating in the meeting, just email me that, and we can look at making an adjustment if there's enough people that feel that the time of the meeting is an issue. I'm glad you brought that up because we want to make sure that, this is, the meeting time is accessible for the people who are supposed to be here. So thank you for bringing it up. But so please feel free to email me if you think that the time of the meeting is an issue, and we can take a look at that. We can put it on the next agenda. So, okay, if there are no other comments.
So I do need to make a statement for the record. On that last vote that you guys took, I looked into it. Maxwell and Searcy had actually dropped off the call, so you did not have quorum.
Oh,
And you do not currently now, so we cannot redo the motion.
okay.
I guess the question would be, since Cersei is on the call,
She's here.
She is, but Al has since left and so has Maxwell, so we lost quorum again.
right?
Okay.
Okay.
So they had
So-
dropped out, Cersei had dropped off temporarily. She was having some connection issues, I think, so,
Okay.
okay.
So what we'll have to do is, we know where the prevailing, we would put it on the next agenda as a motion that's already been made, and then we would take a vote when we are sure that we've got quorum in attendance at the time of the vote.
Okay.
What was the vote? Is it possible for me to vote late? Because I was here, I just would lose you for a few minutes
Well,
here.
we don't have a quorum right now to take the vote again, so
Yeah, okay.
it'll be okay. All right. If there's nothing else, we will adjourn the meeting. Thank you, everybody, for your time and for joining us for this. And thank you, Tom, for participating with us.
It's never simple.